All right. So good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to present my research for my dissertation. The title of the dissertation, as Professor Buckley announced, is Meaning Takes Time to Unfold Towards a Heideggerian Ontology of Temporal Differentiation. This is the outline of my presentation today. So I'll take about 20 minutes to first explain why I would do research in this field on this specific topic, so the occasion of my work. And secondly, a brief note on my methodology, the approach I took to inquire into the intricacies of this philosophical problem of temporal differentiation. And third, that's the major part. It's a synopsis of the major findings I had in my dissertation research. It will take, it consists of 4 parts, so 4 major findings. And finally, summarizing those major findings, I will indicate what my original contribution to the academic research in this field is. So that's the outline. Let me begin with the occasion of the work. So I see this dissertation as a philosophical response to a crisis that we are undergoing in our own age. The crisis, on the one hand, shows itself in the fact that time is becoming an object of management. So we're familiar with the daily scenario of, acceleration, scheduling, procrastination, and so on. And on the other hand, a lot of people feel that life is becoming more and more meaningless. So my dissertation, instead of giving a direct solution to this crisis, is only offering a diagnosis. And this is made from a phenomenological perspective. The thesis I'm trying to propose here in response to this crisis is this dissociation of time from being. And this has been a topic throughout the history of philosophy. It's not peculiar to our own age, but it shows itself in more drastic and violent ways in our own age. Let me explain. So in the first chapter of my dissertation, I problematized a certain position. This position could either be implicit in our everyday understanding or explicit as a philosophical position. So it's called the ontology of the extant. By this, I mean the view that to be, for something to be, means just to be extant, to be out there, to simply exist with a determinacy, so with all its details present in this kind of permanent presence to supposedly a perfect subject of knowing, such as God. And to give you an example, if we take a painting by Rembrandt, the ontology of the extant would view this painting as already having all its details, all its strokes, the colors, textures, figures on it, and so on. And then our own discovery of those details in the painting would be unessential to the being of the painting. So that's why I put here the temporal manifestation of the painting, for example, is considered unessential to the being of the thing. And that means time is dissociated from being in this scenario. The direct implication of this is this banality of things we encounter in the world surrounding us, because everything is considered finished work. They already have all those details in themselves. And nothing is originally manifest, because the occasion where they manifest themselves to us is only accidental. It's not essential to their own being, as I said. And by contrast, in my dissertation, I wanted to propose this idea that meaning is not like an additional property or characteristic of the already fully determined thing. It's not like the thing has like 1,000 characteristics and its meaning is the 1,001st characteristic. Rather, meaning only consists in the unfolding of the thing, bit by bit. And that's why I put in the title, meaning takes time to unfold. The immediate reason I had underlying this claim is that just to take, for example, an aspect of any being, anything, this aspect seizes us only when the rest of the aspects of the thing and the other things recede into the background. And that's the moment of differentiation, as I was putting in the title. So this new version of ontology, which I call the ontology of temporal differentiation, is not just giving us the message that, for example, we should slow down and pay attention to the course of things. Rather, it's about, I guess, patience and openness to what will still arise from the things around us, which we haven't known. Because according to this new ontology I have proposed, they only unfold bit by bit, and there is no way to have a complete picture of the thing. There's always a possibility for something new about them to arise. So that's the more general backdrop of my research. Now I'll get into more technical questions. So first, to make a bit of announcement about my methodology in the dissertation itself, I base my research on the conviction that there are a lot of folds of thought in a philosopher's vocabulary, and they too must gradually unfold in the philosophical discourse. And that is why I cannot dispense with all past philosophical discourses and to start anew, because in that way I will usually just get into the pitfalls that philosophers have dealt with in the past. Rather, I would like to make use of some of those vocabulary, especially from the philosopher Martin Heidegger. But the aim of that is not just to figure out the biographical question of what Heidegger, the man, had in mind in a certain year. Rather, it's a systematic concern which propels my research. So if we take the metaphor which I made in the methodology section in my introduction, the argument I put up is the skeleton of my thesis, whereas the Heideggerian language, or more generally the phenomenological context, is the flesh of it. So the flesh might give the reader more flavor and make more connotations and let them see more consonance or dissonance. But whether this thesis stands depends on the skeleton. And today, I'm precisely going to present the skeleton. So you might not recognize a lot from material from the history of philosophy. I'm more like presenting my view in a systematic way. But there is a peripheral historical implication of my thesis. And this is, I propose the ontology of temporal differentiation, which I'm going to present here, as what Heidegger could have written in his unpublished Division 3 of Being and Time, titled Time and Being. It's supposed to be an inquiry into the meaning of being in general, so Überhaupt. So that's something he supposedly destroyed, did not publish, but at the end of this journey, we're going to see how my account might figure into that lacuna. So that's about methodology. Now let's turn to the major findings I have in this dissertation. The first is called the finitude of being as such. This is my basic assumption. So I will give some support to this claim, but this is my assumption. So I cannot guarantee that it's 100% certain, but we'll see what will follow as long as we assume this. So this is articulated in chapter 1 of my thesis. This is about what it means for anything to be at all. As we remember in the ontology of the extant, so in the supposedly naive realist view, the backdrop of ontology is the full determinacy of things. Whereas in my version of ontology, the backdrop is considered this undifferentiatedness. So it's neither a wholly illuminated field nor a total darkness, but it's more like a gray area, which is nevertheless not a blend of black and white. It's this undistinguished ambiguity. So against this backdrop, if we try to evaluate the manifestation of things in certain aspects, then this manifestation entails that a certain aspect of a certain being must be differentiated from the rest. And for example, if we are looking at Rembrandt's painting and we attend to a certain detail, it means that this detail is differentiated from all other details of the painting and from all other surrounding beings in the immediate environment. And as we see here, this differentiation of that specific detail cannot happen simultaneously for all aspects of the painting, for example. And so it follows that for a concrete thing like a painting, like a historical process, like a tree outside the window, and so on, to be means to have its various aspects become manifest gradually and alternately. So this does not happen all at once. And so this is what I call the finitude of being as such. We see that this finitude pertains to being as such and does not result from our a posteriori limits as finite knowing subjects. Because in making this supporting argument, I did not refer to the factical limits of the human creature. Rather, it pertains to the way things show themselves. So that's my initial assumption here. And so assuming that we agree on this idea of the finitude of being as such, then it's possible for me to articulate a new notion of time, not as just the succession of mutually indifferent instants, not as the neutral index of what happens within time, but as a horizon. So this is what I call the time horizon in the dissertation. The structure of this time horizon I characterize as this formula. So local differentiation in original unity. Let me explain what it means. Well, if we look at any concrete being, we see that that being is a unity. It consists of multiple aspects. But at the same time, as long as we're able to distinguish between those aspects, we need to differentiate between them. But as long as we differentiate between them, they still participate in this unity called the thing. And that's the only way we can distinguish them, because to make any distinction already presupposes that all those distinguished elements participate in this unity. So this is the structure that we observe in things. My thesis here is that the origin of the structure called local differentiation in original unity, is first observed in the time horizon. And that means the time horizon is like a transcendental condition undergirding our experience of things as having this structure. I claim this because if we study the relation, for example, between a now and its adjacent no longer now and not yet now, so namely its immediate past and its imminent future, we observe two parallel processes. First, there is the temporal differentiation of the now, both from the no longer now and from the not yet now. Secondly, there is a temporal synthesis of all those moments so that they participate in a continuous flow instead of being a pile of or an aggregate of moments which are only synthesized afterwards. So this allows me to explain what these two terms mean. So local differentiation, what local means and what original means. Well, to be an original unity means to be unified in the very process of unfolding. So as I said, it's not like we have disparate moments of time and then there is an additional act of synthesizing them together, because that will be a synthesis a posteriori, but we're looking for a synthesis a priori here. And on the other hand, local differentiation means that the distinguishing of this now from its adjacent moments does not happen as if from the outside, as if we're taking, for example, a chronology, according to Christianity, for example, according to the distance a moment has with respect to the birth of Christ. Rather, this differentiation, this distinguishing happens intrinsically in the flow. So it's because this now is a direct response to the situation presented in the no longer now. And it's because the now happens with an anticipation of what it wants to achieve or what it wants to realize in the not yet now, that they're all synthesized and at the same time differentiated from each other. And let me just give a brief example to explain this. Let's think of a historical event. For example, July the 14th of 1789, so the French Revolution. So that moment, if we look at that day, which corresponds to the now here, we see that it's a direct response to the historical situation leading up to it. And also it happens with a certain projection or anticipation into what it wants to realize. So if this moment, this date is distinguished from the before and the after, it's because this date has a relation of meaning with both ends. It's not because we're using, for example, a chronology and distinguish this date, because in that way they're mutually indifferent at bottom. So that's my explanation of the transcendental time horizon underlying what it means for things to be at all. That's the second finding. And thirdly, as long as this time horizon I discovered belongs to a transcendental, namely it's the condition for the possibility of our experience of things, there is a certain risk in this transcendental philosophy, because philosophy is an act of thematization. We're trying to thematize the transcendental. We're trying to thematize what is usually unthematically co-presented with our experience. So the risk in transcendental philosophy is to interpret the transcendental in an ontic way, as if the transcendental were another object. And this risk I observe primarily in a certain subjectivism in transcendental philosophy. This is to locate the transcendental conditions of experience in the ability, the activity, or as Kant calls the faculty of the subject. And if we, in addition, consider the subject as just another object, as another thing, then we have an ontic interpretation of the transcendental. The problem with this is various. So first problem, we might doubt if we absorb the time horizon that we just discovered into the subject's activity, then there is the risk of temporal idealism, the idea that time is made by each individual subject and hence there is no shared scale of time. Secondly, if we consider the subject as a thing, then we're entitled to ask a further condition of the thing called the subject. So we're always looking for further conditions of our experience, and this would lead to an infinite regress. Thirdly, if we take into consideration that the subject is finite, namely the subject is born, it's mortal, and it's corporeal, it's vulnerable, and so on. So as long as we incorporate the finitude of the subject, then its transcendental status becomes shaky. Because in principle, the subject must be a condition of experience which is not further conditioned. Otherwise, we get into the infinite regress. But on the other hand, according to the finitude of the subject, it cannot be a condition of experience which is not further conditioned. So that's the contradiction we're having here. In response to this difficulty of a subjectivist transcendental philosophy, I offer to reinterpret subjectivity according to the newly articulated idea of temporal differentiation. My attempt here is not so much to dispense with the notion of subjectivity altogether, but to situate it within the framework of the ontology of temporal differentiation. Let me explain what this means. So I observe two structures in our notion of subjectivity. They are called discloseness, which in Heidegger's German is Erschlossenheit, and on the other hand, reflexivity. We are traditionally more familiar with this idea of reflexivity, the idea that the subject features a reflexive self-relation, such as Descartes' I think. But I would argue that what's more basic, what's ontologically more relevant for subjectivity is this structure of discloseness. I define it as being a singularized site for the local differentiation that we were just looking at. This is because if we look at the structure of temporal differentiation, this now is highlighted and distinguished from its adjacent moments only because the no longer now and the not yet now are released. They're released into their respective elsewhere instead of being replicated into the present. Because if we replicate them into the present, there is no way to tell between the now and the no longer now and the not yet now. So that means the site of happening, the site of manifestation of a thing in this now must be a here in relation to its elsewhere. And as Merleau-Ponty put it, those elsewhere are not just adjacent to this here, they're rather for this here. So they constitute dimensions, not adjacent moments. So this is how there must be a singularized site for the happening of any event, for the unfolding of anything. And this required singularized site is the prototype of the subject. So that's the structure of this closeness I'm trying to articulate. And then my way to desubjectivize transcendental philosophy of time is to prioritize this closeness over reflexivity, because as we saw, reflexivity features a self-relation, whereas this closeness is about a other relation. It's about the relation of things happening to me. So when I prioritize this closeness over reflexivity, what happens is that I argue that this closeness is a necessary condition of reflexivity. Put in a more plain language, it would mean that only because I am the singularized and irreplaceable site of happening, of the unfolding of things, that my own way of being matter for me. So that's how I argue that this closeness is a necessary condition of reflexivity. The implication of this is subjectivity is made strictly coextensive with the unfolding of things. And to put it into a more figurative language, it would mean that the subject is born and dies along with the unfolding of things. We see in this scenario the finitude of subjectivity, so its natality and mortality, is a consequence of the finitude of being as such. So we're here encountering a reversal. Instead of seeing the finitude of being as a consequence of the finitude of subjectivity, because we have these limits, things must take time to unfold. We're taking this reversal. So yeah, no problem. So I'll get to the final slide, which is the original contribution of my thesis. So these are the four aspects that I just articulated from my work. And I see my major original contribution, apart from those less academic, more life-related implications. So this is a philosophical contribution, and it's about the order. It's about the order of reasoning. So take, for example, the traditional way. I don't have a specific philosopher in mind, but that pertains to my understanding of the Cartesian tradition. So we start in this tradition with the reflexivity of the subject, with the I think. And we have the implication that because the subject is a self-relation, it can be related also to other things. And hence other things can be disclosed to the subject. And as we recognize that this subject is finite, it follows that the temporality of experience and the finitude of being are only the way things appear to us as finite subjects. They do not pertain to the way things are in themselves. Whereas in my ontology of temporal differentiation, I go the reverse way. I say that the finitude of being is assumed, and as I was explaining, I derived step by step a reinterpreted notion of subjectivity. So that's the reversal I'm speaking of here. And I would say that this is a way to understand Heidegger's Kehre, which could be translated as reversal, because if we observe the structure of being and time, it also begins with reflexivity. And so reflexivity is announced at the beginning of the book. This closeness is in chapter 5 of division 1. Temporality is in division 2, and finitude of being is in the unpublished division 3 of being and time. And my work here is to say, well, Heidegger took great pains to do this groundbreaking work to articulate the finitude of being at the end of his journey. And as long as he has cleared up the field, I am now entitled to walk his path in reverse. And that's the Kehre I'm speaking of. So that summarizes my work in the dissertation. Thank you. All right.